This is me perfecting borscht to my taste. I've done some experimentation recently. This is our garage freezer. Made about 40 borsches over the past few weeks. So I'm going to walk you through the process of making what I think is the best borscht based on my experimentation at the time marker below, as well as give you an ingredients list. It only takes about 10-15 minutes. You can fast forward to that if you like. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you the experimentation I did and talk about the history and origins of borscht. Hey, today we're going to test potatoes. Some people don't use potatoes in borscht at all, saying it doesn't add very much. The thing to know about potatoes is they range really from high water content, low starch, like red potatoes and yellow potatoes, to high starch, low water content, like russet potatoes that you use for baking and mashing, and you don't want to use in soup because they'll break up in there. So today I have some yellow potatoes, some red potatoes that we'll test in the soup, and I'm going to try to fry some potatoes, some yellow potatoes actually, and see how that works out in the soup as well. So I do think borscht needs potatoes, gives it some nice structure. Red potatoes being the best, followed by yellow potatoes, followed by fried yellow potatoes, which are too soft, followed by no potatoes. Although just to be safe, I'm going to try some fried and unfried red potatoes today. I don't think it'll make a big taste difference, so I'm going to do it in conjunction with a set of 3 where I fry the spices along with the carrots and onions, and a set of 3 where I add the spices just to the broth. And then I'm going to add some fairly common ingredients, if not, classical. So this set of 2 is going to get some bell peppers, this set of 2 is going to get some beans, and this set of 2 is going to get some prunes, and we'll see what happens. Hey, so from last time, red potatoes are definitely the way to go, and frying them makes them too soft. The other experiment I did was I put in the spices, the allspice and the black pepper, in the carrots and onions while I fry them, and that helped them open up. So I'm definitely gonna do that and add a little bit less of them because you could kind of really taste the allspice and black pepper in the version where I added them in with the carrots and onions to be fried. And in regard to the kind of experimental ingredients of prunes, they were good. I feel like some sugar is definitely needed, whether it's in the form of prunes or, I'm sure that's why, these chefs add dried fruit. You could probably just add sugar and it'll be the same. Maybe that's something I'll work on as well. But I would chop them finely. I kind of cut them into quarters, and I didn't like getting a piece of prune in my mouth while I was eating borscht, but I did like the little kind of sweet flavor. Bell peppers were fine. You're not gonna hurt your borscht with bell peppers. They're not necessary. If you have them, throw them in. I kind of take them or leave them. I'll probably move on without bell peppers in my borscht. Beans, same thing. You're not gonna ruin your borscht, but I didn't like them. They kind of took the taste in a different direction, and it wasn't something I liked. Hey, today we're gonna experiment with some broth. I'm gonna do some beef broth and vegetable broth, and then I'm gonna add up some parsnips to these. I'm gonna add a little bit of garlic at the end into these. I'm gonna add a little bit of cayenne to these to add a little bit of heat, but not really much taste. And then I'll also mix these two and these two and these two, so I'll have 9 little borsches at the end, and see what works best in regard to broth and these 3 extraneous ingredients. Hey, to follow from last time, I don't think garlic belongs in borscht, at least not the kind of late addition raw garlic taste. Maybe I'll try to saute it earlier in the process, see if that works. Similar with cayenne, I added just a pinch to 2 of them, and it was too hot. I don't want heat overpowering the other flavors I'm trying to work on. In regard to broth, I was surprised last time I made borscht. I actually like the vegetable broth based borscht the best. Followed slightly behind that was the mixture of beef and vegetable broth. Followed slightly behind that was the beef broth based borscht. So So here I'm warming up the pan to try to see which fat is best to fry my carrots and onions and spices in. I got a lot of duck fat here, got some butter, some grapeseed oil, and some grapeseed oil and butter. And I'm definitely using a little more quantity than I would normally use to fry something, but it's because I really want to kind of see the taste of the fat to see what's best. I'll let you guys know. So actually, I was shocked that there is a really big difference between the four batches of onions and carrots. The butter one being the best one. I expected the duck fat to be the best one, but it wasn't. The duck fat, maybe it's tied with the oil and butter one together. With the one, this one has oil and butter, both mixed. And this one is oil. It's the worst, but it's still fine. Definitely. The butter one's the best. The problem with butter is you have to slow cook it on the frying pan. That's the reason people combine butter and oil, is because your butter will burn if you have too high temperature. So if you're in a rush, you can use both. I think the vegetables I would like to add to borscht is butter fried ones on, a nice low heat. Now I'm gonna mix all four of them up together, and that way, the same carrots and onion goes into all 6 of my little borschts that I'm making today. As you might have guessed by now, people have their own way of doing borscht, and each item could be a 2-hour debate. But I'm gonna say a couple words about beets. So just a brief word about texture of beets, how to cut them. A lot of people use cheese grater. I've done it many times with cheese grater. It's great. It works well. It's it's nice texture in your mouth. Some people, this sometimes if it's really long, it can kind of drip and splatter a little bit when you're trying to eat it. But other people say that kind of helps release the flavor and color faster, which I don't know if that really matters. A lot of chefs cut beets into these little matchsticks, which is time consuming, unless maybe there's some method to do it. I don't know. I'm sure there is. I have adopted this little cube method because I have this little machine here that you put slices of beets on here, you push down, and boom, you get a bunch of different cubes. And they're different sizes than I make my potato cubes. So then after you have a borscht for a long time, you can tell the difference here. And the last thing is, this is about a baseball-sized beet. Some people say, if they get big, they kind of taste not as good. They lose some of the flavor. I don't know if that's true, but I've definitely heard that. So in regard to chopping carrots, you want to, start out when it's thin, have little small pieces like this. When it gets a little thicker, you want to get little halves. Boom. And then, when it gets really thick, you want to cut it into cut it 4 times lengthwise. And then chop it. So you get basically the same size pieces, get little cubes here. That's for my meat experiment later, for whether the sear or not matters. So this is seared. This is not seared. I'm gonna taste them. Seared is better. There's a reason we sear with meat. Better texture, better flavor. Not a big deal if you don't do it. One of my friends said, hey, why you're using broth? There's this thing called bouillon base, and it's basically broth that's, this plus water equals broth, so why not just use this or add this to broth? So I'm gonna try that today. I'm gonna add, again, I'm gonna use vegetable broth, I'm gonna use beef broth in another set, and then I'm gonna add some better than bouillon vegetable base, and I have some better than bouillon beef base. I'm gonna switch, do some experiments where I add different bouillon bases to different broths, and then I'll try some with water and some white wine, and I'll let you guys know how it works out. I know making your own broth is probably best, but that really extends the process of, putting the meat and the celery and the carrots and everything and letting it simmer. The borscht I'm showing you to make probably take an hour and a half. So bouillon broth brings up the issue of saltiness, and you're supposed to salt food about 0.5% to 1% by weight, and add it earlier on in the process so the food absorbs it and gets seasoned I saw this thing on American Test Kitchen where they salted a chicken and it took 24 hours for the salt to make its way to the center of the chicken. So, if you forget to add salt and throw it in at the end, it's not going to make its way into the food. It's going to be superficial and taste way saltier. So if you ever do forget to add salt, add less salt at the end. In regard to soups, that doesn't seem to be hold true. If you Google how much salt you should add, they're gonna say something similar to what I said about food in general, but all the recipes always have at least half of that. I don't like a lot of sodium. It makes me feel like I get a little bloated. So I like to add about a teaspoon of salt to my gallon of borscht. And you can always add more at the end. So this bouillon base is, if you compare it to kosher salt, it's a little over a third salt. So if you take 2.5 teaspoons of this, you can have the same amount of sodium as a teaspoon of kosher salt. So another thing in regard to soups, they say, different from normal food, you don't want to salt in the beginning because it reduces and becomes saltier, and it is fairly easy for the salt to spread within the soup, especially if you have something that's pureed. In our case, it is going to take a little bit of time to work its way into the ingredients, but I don't care too much about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use about a quarter of the total salt I want to use on the onions when I saute them, so they release a little bit of water and cook a little bit faster. So normally I add the remaining amount of salt I want to use at the end, but here, since I already know that I want a teaspoon of salt total in my broth, I'm gonna take that into account and add that amount of bouillon to my soup ahead of time. And then it's, a teaspoon is not that much salt. So at the end, I can always add more salt. And just a fun fact, there's salts, basic varieties of salt is, there's iodinized salt, which is tiny little cubes, and a lot more of them kind of fit into a teaspoon. So you get 2,300 milligrams of sodium in a teaspoon of iodinized salt, whereas you get only about 1,800 in a teaspoon of kosher salt. And with iodinized salt, you can't heat it up too high of a temperature either, so you don't want to use it for searing steak or anything. It doesn't matter for soup, you can add it in, but just be aware that there's a difference in sodium levels. And then besides those two salts, which you can use for everyday salting, there's finishing salts, like fleur de sel or Maldon salt. Fleur de sel looks like Swiss cheese. I'm not gonna be able to show you, but to increase surface area. And same thing with Maldon salt. Look at these giant, high surface area crystals of salt. Anyway, so that's if you want a little punch of salt at the end. Hey, last time I did a bunch of experiments with bouillon base and the vegetable broth with beef bouillon base and the beef broth with vegetable bouillon base. They taste pretty different, but it's hard for me to decide which one I like better. I think I'm gonna go with vegetable broth with a little bit of bouillon base. I think it definitely helps the flavor. One of the things I notice is, when you really cook down the, liquid part of the borscht, that really makes it taste good. So I really think this bouillon base addition will help. And then vegetable base into vegetable broth was probably the next best, and the other ones are not great. I mean, not as good as those three. So today I'm gonna experiment a little more. I'm gonna use a little bit more broth. I'm gonna chop cabbage, shred it. I'm gonna experiment with what acids to use in beets. If you happen to have pre-cooked beets, you don't need to add acid. You could just use those. But anyway, so we're gonna start with raw beets. So you need to add some acid to that to help it keep the color. And I think it's a nice addition anyway. So we're gonna fry the beets when we get to that stage with lemon juice. We're gonna try vinegar. I use a little sumac for one of them, and a different kind of vinegar. Gotta look, see what I have. Probably champagne and rice are the two vinegars I'll use. All right, here we got beets and tomato paste being fried in some lemon juice. Here we got beets and tomato paste being fried in some sumac. Here we got beets and tomato paste being fried in some vinegar. And we're gonna see what it tastes like. All right, I just put in an equal amount of some of the fried beet mixture into a glass of water. This is lemon juice, vinegar, sumac. This is not super meaningful difference in color, although sumac one is surprisingly darkest looking. All right, we're gonna see what it tastes like. So the 3 beet mixtures did not all taste the same. The lemony beets, you definitely taste the lemon. That's like the primary flavor that comes. These two, the vinegar and sumac, tasted more similar to each other and sweet. But the vinegar one, you could taste a little bit of vinegar. I don't know if it'll come through ultimately in the borscht. But I would say sumac is the best, and it tastes the best, tastes the sweetest, and produces the darkest color. So I'm gonna experiment a little bit more. I'm gonna add some parsnips to this borscht today. I'm gonna add some sauerkraut instead of cabbage to this one. I'm gonna add some tomatoes to this. Maybe the juice, but more likely I'll use a can of diced tomatoes, maybe fire roasted tomatoes. I have some beet kvass I'm brewing. I'm gonna add at the end to this one. And I'm gonna add some Pinot Grigio wine to this one. And I'll have one as a base. And I'll let you guys know how it turns out. All right, I just put cabbage. There's some parsnips in this one. Oop. There's some extra carrots in this one. Got a little bit of tomato in that one. Definitely some white wine in that one. Some sauerkraut I just put in. And this is our control. All right, here I got the parsnip one. Extra carrots. White wine. Tomatoes. Sauerkraut instead of cabbage. This is the control. This one I'm gonna add a little bit of sugar to. And here I have some beet kvass I made. So I'm gonna put a little bit into this one. And these 3 are all control. I'm just gonna add a little bit of sugar, a little bit of beet kvass. I'm gonna do a little bit of a taste test of tomato paste. I'm gonna fry some in oil on medium-high heat. I'm gonna fry some in butter on low heat. I'm gonna taste just some unfried, all 3 of them, see what's best. Get a little bit of medium-high heat going, like that. A little bit of low heat on butter here. Got some just raw there. Here I got some tomato paste fried in oil for about 5 minutes. Here I got some tomato paste fried in butter for about 15 minutes. And this is some raw tomato paste. And I wish I had the vocabulary to describe the taste difference. These 2 tastes very similar, which makes me think that I don't need to fry beets with tomato paste on medium or high. I can simmer them in butter for a little bit longer. But fried tomato paste tastes super different than the unfried tomato paste. This really tastes like, I don't know, smashed up concentrated tomatoes. This tastes like delicious sauce. Hey, today we're gonna taste test some bay leaves. I've always heard they kind of lighten things up and are like minty. I'm just gonna pour some boiling water into a cup with some bay leaves and make sure. So this guy is steeped for about half an hour, and I mean, it tastes real herby. Like there's a little bit of mint. I could see it, kind of lightening things up a bit, but I probably would not describe it that way primarily. I think it tastes like herbs you'd put on a chicken, maybe like Earl Grey tea. Yeah, I could definitely see it going really well with some sort of rice, chicken dish, and soups. Definitely has like herbal tea flavor. Hey, last time I tried some fire roasted tomatoes, and the black kind of roasted part was way too strong, and really that flavor overpowered the taste. So today I'm gonna try some plain diced, nothing added tomatoes. I'm gonna try some prune juice as the sweet component. I tried prunes in the past and I didn't like the texture. And then, yeah, I'm gonna try a little bit of different proportions in regard to sauerkraut. I'm gonna do sauerkraut along with cabbage and with some alcohol, and let's see what happens. Here we got a little vodka in this one, just a touch of sauerkraut in there. We got tomatoes in here. This one's the control, and here we have some prune juice. I went back to the cheese grated beets. I really think it doesn't matter how you cut them. I think I'm used to them this way. Whatever's easiest for you, I say do it that way. And I'm using a little bit more broth this time as well. More broth to components ratio. The vodka one, it adds a little bit of richness, but also like a little harsh note. So I'm gonna say no vodka, and it's kind of similar experience with the Pinot Grigio. I'm not gonna put alcohol in this soup. Tomato, I think it's a slight plus. I think I'm gonna keep tomato. Prune juice was great. Oh, it's over here. That's a winner. Just a little bit of sauerkraut. I'm gonna leave it. I don't think it's necessary. I think it doesn't really add much. So where did borscht come from? If you see somebody saying it's solely of, Ukrainian origin or Polish origin or Russian origin, that's crap, because the truth is we don't know. It's even within the realm of possibility that it was made first in, non-Slavic governments by non-Slavic people. It's very unlikely, but, the kind of key components of borscht being cabbage and beets, both native to the Mediterranean. We know Romans made cabbage soup, and those two ingredients got to East Slavic lands, by way of the Black Sea. So, who controlled the northern Black Sea? It wasn't always, East Slavs. There was a Tanais colony in the 15th century, or even before that. That was a Venetian and then Genoan endeavor. And then there's, of course, a bunch of different Turkic peoples that controlled that area before Russia conquered it from the Ottomans. So it's possible, these ingredients went up there, and these people formed borscht that, some sort of, Slavic people later came and took over. It's unlikely, but... So it looks like the evolution of borscht went like this. It began as a dish that was a compilation of things that took its name from hogweed, perhaps with, beet and cabbage. Then there was another stage of evolution from the early 19th century to the mid 19th century, at which point we have borscht that looks like today's borscht. It has the core ingredients, potatoes, beets, carrots, cabbage, onions, bay leaves, you name it. So by the mid 19th century, you really have today's borscht. But, how do historians know where something like borscht came from? Basically through literary references. As far as I can tell, the first literary reference is in this Russian book called Domostroy. It was first published in the 1550s. We know this because there's some early manuscripts where Sylvester, the editor of the book, references Ivan the Terrible's wife, who, as if she were living, who died in 1560. There's another one where there's another letter he wrote to his son where he mentions the manuscript, and there's indication that it was published in 1552. So anyway, by the 1550s, it looks like Domostroy was in circulation. This book, interestingly, mentions borscht as it was used at the time in reference to hogweed, the plant. In chapter 41, it talks about, gathering and treating hogweed in conjunction with gathering and preparing other root vegetables like beets and actually cabbage as well. So to me, this seems like, could be the link between borscht, the plant, preparing some sort of dish that'll be called borscht that later will no longer contain that plant, the plant being hogweed. There's a Polish book called The Life of an Honest Man, in which also a guy talks about borscht in reference to hogweed and preparing it and fermenting it. It's like 15 years later, so it's probably common through this East Slavic lands to have hogweed be called borscht, Bolshevik. At what point is it reasonable to say borscht was invented? Like, it's an evolution, really, maybe from domostroy, from that mixture of cabbage, beet, hogweed mixture, all the way through to 1806. There's a German-Polish dictionary that describes borscht as a tart beet soup. So tart probably because they fermented part of it, probably the beets. So there's an 1842 book called Guide for Experienced Russian Housewives that lists several versions of beet borscht soup. And it's proto-borscht. It's not like the 1861 borscht that really looks like today's borscht. So there's a couple of varieties in this book. One of them is Malorossiyski, which is small Russians, which was a reference to Ukrainians. And then there's in 1854 a Lithuanian cookbook called The Lithuanian Cook, which supposedly mentions borscht in connection to small Ukrainians as well. And that's the Ukrainian claim, that these references to Ukrainian borscht make it a Ukrainian innovation. So anyway, by 1861, this book comes out, a gift to a young housewife, which has a ton of versions of borscht already. Borscht the soup, the beet soup, including this is the English translated version, borscht with fried herring. Maybe not gonna try that. I guess don't diss it till you try it. And if you look at the ingredient list for the Russian book, A Gift to Young Housewives, for the 1861, it already has carrots, bay leaves, allspice, onions, leeks, oil, celery for the base. So that's already borscht for sure. Potatoes, of course, were substituted, or rutabaga, turnips were used before potatoes got to Russia. They only became widespread in 1850. So then by 1861, it's already, many variations of borscht. And I say Russia because, by the 19th century, all the places that have the strongest claim to borscht, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus is between all of them. They were all part of the Russian Empire already. So, if you had to say which country invented borscht, it's extremely likely it was the Russian Empire. The Ukrainian Belarusian nationalism didn't exist until after World War One. But if you're saying, which ethnicity invented borscht, certainly don't know that. Even if by some reason we had information that it was certainly invented in Russia, within Russia, it could have been Ukrainians, it could have been Chuvash or, Tatar. The best answer is borscht was invented in the Russian Empire. We don't know for sure. It's borscht today is part of the national cuisine of Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Romania, and Moldova. So since we don't know for sure where it's from, I don't see any reason to deny these people their borscht. And if anybody has any information that's not just, a mention in some source that says borscht is X, there's a lot of books that say passingly, borscht is Ukrainian or borscht is Russian. If you have any information beyond just a mention of that, like some sort of historical proof that, may help indicate one way or the other, please write it in the comments. I'd love to see it. I've done some research and, to me, it seems it's likely to be East Slavic, and really can't say more than that. So after about the 1850s, when borscht was for sure established in its kind of modern form, it kind of spread in all directions except Western Europe, where they were kind of, looked down their nose at Eastern European food. But you know, went to Finland and Persia, and uh, with the Russian Civil War, a lot of people fighting on the white side went to China, and then you know, Chinese had their own communist revolution, so a lot of those Russians went to Hong Kong. So there's a Hong Kong borscht, which interestingly enough doesn't have beets, but it has red cabbage. So really, it's a lot. It's basically shi, which is kind of a much older Russian soup, which is basically borscht without the beets. But yeah, so you know, Soviets kind of shot it into space as food for cosmonauts, um, and Jews coming to America brought it with them and brought the tea. So in the U.S., people say borscht with a T. That's why there's a difference. You know, in Eastern Europe, there's no T at the end. This recipe makes a little over a gallon, so feel free to half it if you want to make a little less borscht. So here's how you make this delicious and healthy soup. It's really just vegetable soup if you look at the ingredients. Um, my wife and I actually both prefer this without meat. I'm gonna show you how to do it with meat today. If you wanna do it without meat, just obviously exclude the meat. And if you wanna do it vegetarian, just switch the beef broth base to broth base. It's just as good. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna salt the meat here I have, which is, you know, stew meat. This I think actually is chuck, just chopped up into cubes. It's the traditional way to do it. I like to put in sausage sometimes, although again, I said like, I really prefer without meat the best. I'm gonna salt it. A half teaspoon of salt here. Just put it on the meat here and let it, you know, mix it in a bit. I'm just gonna give the meat a little bit of time to soak up the salt. In the meantime, I'm gonna make the broth and chop up some carrots and onions, which will be the first ingredients we fry. So, what I like to do is, I use all vegetable broth. I like to put about half of a container in here, and put the rest in here, and the other two as well. So with this half a container, I'm gonna microwave it, get it hot, and mix in some bouillon base. Meanwhile, I'm gonna turn the broth onto low heat, and I'll just stay low until I tell you to turn it up. And now we're gonna peel some carrots while the kind of meat rests and absorbs the salt. So in regard to salt content, all the stuff that has salt, except this, going into the broth, the tomato paste, the broth has the equivalent of about 1/10 of a teaspoon of kosher salt, so not very much. Another half teaspoon if you're doing meat, you should salt the meat a little bit. But then this stuff, which is bouillon base, is about 1/3 salt. So I'm gonna use a tablespoon of it. So it's gonna be an additional 1 teaspoon of salt. And then another half teaspoon will come when I put all the salt on the onions. So getting a nice tablespoon here, mixing it into our warm broth, and putting that right here. Next we're gonna chop an onion. So the reason I have the broth going from the start is basically as components get added to the soup, slowly like little bits of it evaporate and the flavor concentrates throughout the cooking process, might as well. All right, so now I'm gonna sear the meat, which will also make it taste better and have a nicer texture. So on about a medium high, you wanna just sear the meat about 1.5 minutes. Stir like once, maybe twice. That's about it, just 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes maybe. Put it on a paper towel. So back to the frying pan. Now we're on medium-low heat. Something like that, fairly low. Maybe a little lower. I will add about 1¼ tablespoons of butter. Gonna put in our onion. So the onion gets about a ½ teaspoon of salt, just to help it release the water and get going. Mix all this up. Now we're gonna add the carrots right away as well. So here we're gonna also add a teaspoon of allspice and a teaspoon of black pepper. Just mix this and leave it for about 15 minutes, stirring occasionally. All right, while that's going for 15 minutes, I'm gonna chop potatoes. I said 3 potatoes, about 3 potatoes of this size. This is a big one. So this is equivalent to 3 these size potatoes. All right, I got a couple more minutes. I'm gonna start peeling the beets. So it's been about 15 minutes. Nice and simmered down here. Add this right to the soup. All right. Next, I'm gonna add the potatoes. Also the tomatoes. And my 3 bay leaves. Boom, boom, boom. Right, now we can also add the meat. Which, by the way, is a pound of meat with fat, and I trimmed the fat off. But, all right, so now onto the beets. This, 2.5 baseball-sized beets is what I think is perfect. So I think I went back a little bit between how to cut it, and I ended up with the cheese grater method being the best. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and grate it into this little machine, but I think that's the texture that I've been going for. So once again, back to the frying pan. I'm gonna turn it back to medium-low. Put in my other part of butter, which is about 1¾ tablespoons of butter. So again, this is on medium-low. Now we add in our beautiful beets. Similar to the previous routine, we're gonna get this mixed up and leave it to simmer on medium-low for about 15 minutes. Before we do that, we're gonna add some tomato paste and sumac. Now, usually people add lemon juice or vinegar, and I don't know if it's really necessary to have an actual low pH, but sumac has a tangy, acidic taste, and I just really like the way it goes in the beets. So it's almost a whole tube of paste here. And you really can't mess it up with frying more tomato paste than you should. The fried tomato paste is really good. And a tablespoon of sumac. Sumac's good for you, it's an anti-inflammatory. I'm gonna mix this all together. Once you feel like you've sufficiently mixed it, just let it simmer for about 15 minutes. And in the meantime, we're gonna cut up our cabbage. I use about 1/3 of a cabbage. one of the last ingredients here. I want to add about 2 ounces of, this is 1.5 ounces of prune juice. All right, it's been 15 minutes on medium heat. Add it to the soup. All right, now we're gonna bring it to a boil, and once it comes to a boil, we're gonna turn it out to simmer and let it cook for 30 minutes. All right, it's come to a boil. Now just give it a little stir and turn it down to low, and just leave it there for half an hour. Just it'll reduce a little bit, kind of intensify that flavor. Done and beautiful. Dollop of sour cream in there. Serve it with some black bread. Look at that, so good. That's delicious. And it's good for you, it's easy to make. I didn't document it, but I also did a bunch of experimentation with my favorite soup called Sri Lanka, which you can also find on this channel. Yeah, I think for next time, I've been working on some Uzbek plov, and some kvass, and some piroshki, which might go nicely with soups. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.